From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. When seeking out guests for this show, an objective I have is to find people who are working on some of our society's toughest issues, those very things that challenge our sense of optimism. There are few issues more challenging and divisive than immigration and the plight of refugees and asylum seekers around the globe. And my guests today, Mary Louise and Bruce Cohen, are working on solutions here with an infectious sense of can-do optimism. Mary Louise and Bruce Cohen are a husband and wife team. You'll learn more about how they met shortly. And they're the co-founders of an organization called Talent Beyond Boundaries, an organization working on developing labor mobility solutions for refugees by matching those with marketable skills to places where they can help fill talent gaps. Mary Louise Cohen, a graduate of Harvard Law School, is a founding partner of Phillips & Cohen LLP and has represented whistleblowers for more than 30 years in lawsuits brought to remedy fraud against the United States. Her firm has recovered more than $12 billion for state and federal governments in cases filed under the False Claims Act. Her husband, Bruce Cohen, served as a top lawyer in the Senate for almost 2 decades. As chief counsel and staff director for the Senate Judiciary Committee, he coordinated the Democratic staff of the Senate Judiciary Committee and worked with his Republican counterparts, Senate leadership, the House, and the administrations of Presidents Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. Bruce graduated from Stanford University and from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, where he was editor-in-chief of the California Law Review. As you can tell, these two have remarkable track records and are now bringing their significant talents to some extremely important and impactful work. I should caution you here that we did have some slight connection issues during this interview, and while they may present a few challenges making out a word here or there, with a little patience, you shouldn't have any issues following along. I hope you enjoy this blue sky conversation with Mary Louise and Bruce Cohen as much as I did. Mary Louise and Bruce Cohen, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thanks very much.
You are not the first time I've had 2 guests on it at a time, but you are the first married couple. So we have to do a little quick housekeeping. How you all met? My understanding is you were Washington, D.C. lawyers. So was it a lawyers in love kind of thing, or how did you two meet each other?
It was the old-fashioned way. Bruce was my boss.
Oh, boy. Oh, that's a whole episode.
We met on Capitol Hill.
Okay.
And she then took my job, and the rest is history.
Wow. Okay. So you've been married how long now?
40 years in September.
Congratulations in advance. Amazing. And you attended the Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard University in 2014, which I did a few years later. And I believe it was your son who told you that might be something you wanted to pursue because you were getting ready to retire, as I understand it, from your legal profession, your legal careers, but felt like you had a lot more you wanted to contribute. So could you walk us through that and then how you wound up working as you have with refugees and immigrants?
Sure. I'll start. Was leaving. I had been Senator Leahy's chief counsel for almost 20 years and was leaving the Senate and had no idea what I wanted to do next. And it was one of our kids who said that a parent of his friend had been in ALI, and it's something I might like and Mom might like too. And that's how we were introduced to ALI.
I was gonna say I didn't 100% walk away from my legal practice. I have a law firm representing whistleblowers who turn in companies that cheat the federal government.
Oh, wow.
And over the last several years, I had stepped back to where I was probably only spending 10% of my time at the law firm and had spent the rest of my time on a couple of other nonprofit projects.
Gotcha. And so did you go into the ALI year with an eye towards working on this problem that you wound up working on, or was it something that came to you? And if so, how?
We started out focused on immigration reform.
And when I left the Senate, one of the things that had happened in June of that summer was the Senate had passed with, I think, almost 70 votes, a comprehensive immigration reform bill. I was naive enough to think that the House of Representatives might take it up and something would pass and need to be implemented. And what we started with was thinking about how people could get out of the shadows and pay all the fines and fees and penalties that were likely to be included in a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Later that year, when we were at Harvard, it became clear that the House was not going to take up immigration, and we needed to look for another project.
So in the summer of 2014, our daughter's best friend growing up was Syrian American. And she invited us to a UNICEF fundraiser focused on Syrian refugee children. So Bruce and I went to the fundraiser because you do that when your children's friends invite you to things. And the speaker at that fundraiser was Taya Leone. And she's a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. She had just returned from a trip to Jordan. And she said what really struck her about this crisis that seemed different from other crises she'd been involved in was how many of the people she met had been skilled professionals before they had to run. And Bruce and I looked at each other and said, well, if there really are all these skilled professionals, why aren't they using their skills and moving on work visas and getting to where they can lead a life where they can make a living and support their kids?
Amazing. And so that's the beginning of Talent Beyond Boundaries. And
yes.
I went to your website. It's a terrific website, by the way. And very simple mission and vision. What if we could help millions of refugees simply by recognizing their skills? So let's talk about that. People get displaced. They're not their country of origin. They have all these skills, but what tends to get in their way? I experienced some of this with immigrants in our former home state of Maine, where they're coming in with law degrees, medical degrees, and there at least what I saw was it's just different rules. The law degree from Rwanda doesn't count here in the United States, and you got to start over. I'm sure there are other obstacles. Can you describe those? What these talented people are facing that you're trying to help them with?
Sure. The obstacles are things as simple as not having a current passport, which you might not have had when you had to run. It may be not having proof of employment in your field for the last 3 years because you've run and you're working off book and you don't have an employer to stand up for you because it's technically illegal for you to work. It may be that you just don't know what options are out there and that the employers have no idea that there's this talent pool sitting in Lebanon, Jordan, Kampala, pick a city around the world.
And part of the problem can be that the country nearest your home country may not allow you to work legally. That is, when you have to run and you're displaced, you may end up in a situation where the host country is not willing to allow you to take part in their economy. So you may need to move again in order to be able to work legally. And what we've been trying to do is open up legal pathways so that people can use their skills and talents and take care of themselves again, become self-reliant, instead of having to be limited to a very small number of humanitarian spaces where the UN Refugee Agency refers people to countries that will take refugees. We don't want to use those humanitarian slots, which are designed for the most rather We want to open up skilled labor pathways so that people can take care of themselves.
I have to admit that it was tempting for me to pursue more on the Cohens' answer to my "How did you meet?" question. But that's a conversation for another podcast, not Blue Sky. I was also interested to hear how these two decided to pursue solutions to immigration challenges, with a focus on identifying refugees with skills to help fill the talent gaps that exist around the globe. Their work in the federal government helped them understand that immigration reform has not made a lot of political headway in the United States. And as determined entrepreneurs are wont to do, they worked on ways to make a difference elsewhere and in other countries. And by focusing on the idea of placing skilled workers with employers looking for them, Mary Louise and Bruce have created a model that's hard for anyone to argue with. Now, back to our conversation. And so is the bulk of your work, and let's call it TBB for Talent Beyond Boundaries, is the bulk of TBB's work, these are refugees who are not in the United States. You're working on sort of inter-country transitions overseas. Can you give some examples of the places where you've done the most of your work?
We've done a lot of work in Canada and Australia. And the reason those two countries were the first two places we went was both of those countries recognized that for their economy to grow, they need to import talent. And so they are very committed to attracting a diverse international workforce. And our goal wasn't to have special refugee visas for the TBB clients. It's to have them move on traditional skilled visas so that they're not dealing with, caps and limitations. And our focus has been on trying to figure out how to make those skilled visa pathways accessible to refugees by sort of removing roadblocks that hurt refugees.
When those pathways were set up, they were set up as economic pathways, not with people in refugee circumstances in mind. So there are a lot of unintended barriers. And working with the governments of Canada, Australia, and elsewhere, UK, they've become aware of those barriers and been willing to mitigate against those barriers so that they can import more talent.
So when you work, let's stay with Canada, it's much closer. If you work with Canada, are you trying to set up a field in Canada where there's now a place where you can safely help people move to? Or are these refugees who are in Canada looking for work?
No, they're refugees who are in precarious situations overseas. And what we're building is the pathway that gets them from the refugee setting to a setting where they can live, work, send their kids to school and build a future.
Got it. Okay. So somewhere overseas, let's just do a scenario. There's a Syrian refugee with background in, I'm making it up, in engineering. And so how do they find TBB? How does TBB find them? And then how does this all work? And then there's the logistics of physically getting someone to Canada. Yeah. I mean, this is very ambitious stuff.
Right. Well, our first thing we did, going back, 2016, we built something we call the talent catalog. And what we did was we built an online database of refugees with skills. And to do that, we actually had people on the ground in Lebanon and Jordan doing outreach to refugee communities, asking people to come in and register their skills so that we could prove to the governments of Canada and Australia, and significantly to employers who are very important in this whole scenario, that there were refugees with skills could fill some of their talent gaps. Over time, as we become better known, we've got partners who tell people about TBB. We have UN agencies who tell people about TBB. There are now 100,000 skilled refugees registered through our talent catalog. So that's sort of, the refugees come in that way. On the employer side, we have teams in Canada, Australia, the UK, the EU, who work with the private sector and the government to make sure that private sector knows that there's this talent resource. As employers are interested in hiring, our teams on the ground in both countries work to connect people up, facilitate interviews, and get the visas issued.
Incredible. And then I suppose then the private sector in a place like Canada then is very supportive of this program. They're seeing it work. It's filling their needs in a labor shortage. And I assume there's sort of a flywheel effect now, and they're more vested. And maybe there's even, I assume you take philanthropic gifts, so maybe there's even that side too, where this is good for business. Or would a Canadian firm pay TBB for this placement? Or is it sort of, you hope maybe they're on your list of donations next year? How does that work?
Yeah, we are getting expenses paid for some of, because it's expensive. It's not just our time. It's the visa fees, the lawyers, the health exams, the language testing.
The travel, right? And the travel expenses.
Right. So employers are increasingly underwriting those expenses.
The refugees' expenses, the families' expenses.
We have had some success with some employers who are particularly in need of our support, underwrite some of our costs. For example, in the UK, we've been helping deal with nursing shortages there. And I believe that the private sector and the government has been paying some of our costs for that, as well as the cost for getting the refugees there. But you're right, we do take philanthropic money.
Yes, yes. And we'll give that full information soon. So you've mentioned several countries. Several of them are English-speaking countries. You are both American. You have both worked in Washington. One of the countries you haven't mentioned working with is the United States. Is the feeling that we're just too far behind on these laws to make it worth your effort? Why not more of a focus here on the United States?
We opened up a U.S. effort about 2 years ago, maybe. And we are actually working right now with the State Department on a program that's a little bit of a different kind of program. It's a program that state is funding, where they are allowing private sponsors to facilitate refugee movement. And we are working to gather employer sponsors to hire refugees and bring them into the State Department program. So that's one of our first efforts. We're also working, testing the Genius Visa. And we have an Iranian woman who is an outstanding designer, and we're trying to get her a Genius Visa right now. So we're testing what existing pathways are, because that's the way to know what changes you have to make. And you are right, though, that the U.S. is tough because we have far too few skilled work visas for the number of immigrants who want to use them, and it makes it tough.
The politics surrounding immigration is also very difficult in the United States, but I believe there will come a time in the not too distant future where the United States will realize we're losing out on talent. We're not in competition with Canada, Australia, the UK, and Western Europe, and they are increasingly open to accepting refugee talent and benefiting by it. And I think at some point our competitiveness will kick in, and businesses will get the government to understand we have to do a better job of allowing talented refugees to come to the United States.
Oh, it's funny. You're working on a far more complicated issue of refugees trying to get work in the United States. Even people, as you know, who are getting educated in the United States, it's hard for them. And they're getting these master's degrees at elite American universities, and then they have to leave because they don't get a job in 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is.
It's crazy. It's crazy. The Canadians, I think, make it very easy for you to stay there when you graduate from one of their universities.
Well, and I assume I'm fixated on Canada, as you can tell. I'm a hockey fan. I don't know why else. I assume, though, that would be a great sort of case for you to present to the movers and shakers in the United States. If you've developed this incredible system in Canada, you'd think that could be something you could hold up to people here and say, this is how it works just north of the border. One, A, and B, would you ever consider working with a refugee in the United States and helping them go to Canada? Is that something that could be done?
I don't think we would do that because the refugee in the United States is, if you're a refugee in the U.S., you've come in legally, or assuming you've come in legally, you are safe, secure. You don't have to worry about being shipped back to the country you fled from. And we would focus on refugees who are in danger.
It seems clear from listening to their story that the Cohens understood the need to do foundational work before diving into making matches between refugees and potential host countries and employers. By creating a talent catalog with a remarkable 100,000 registered workers, Talent Beyond Boundaries created invaluable infrastructure for the work ahead. And while TBB's work to date has been most effective in Canada and Australia, the Cohens remain optimistic that the United States will soon be a strong partner as well, as the competitive drive of this country will make the U.S. want to attract the most and best talent that it can. Getting back to our conversation, I wanted to learn more about how Talent Beyond Boundaries works with private employers. Let's talk about the private sector partners that you have. Are there companies that you specifically pursue to try to sort of get them to be partners of TBB, or how do you work that side of it? Because it sounds, what I read about your work, that's been a real focus of yours. So let's work with the private sector, sort of create the demand for these skilled workers, right? How do you go about that? And are there a handful who do most of the work with you, or is it starting to spread to more companies and other employers?
Yeah, it's pretty spread out. I mean, we have 65 people who work at TBB. So we have teams in Canada, Australia, the UK, Western Europe, whose focus really is to do that employer outreach. The industries that are particularly helpful for us are industries that have big shortages. So as you can imagine, that's healthcare. In the UK, it's nurses. In Canada, it's long-term care. We've had some manufacturing companies too. In Canada, we had a water bottling company that was in desperate need of people. And folks from Ice River in Northern Ontario went to Lebanon, interviewed a bunch of people, and hired 8 refugees to go back and work in this factory. We have a lot of tech people who are hired. And tech is interesting because the language of tech is English. A lot of tech people speak English. And that's a skill that employers can pretty easily assess remotely.
But we've done really any marketable skill. We have helped move tool and die makers.
There's a big demand for butchers, for example, in Australia. We could get as many butchers as we get a fine.
If we, welder, there are certain skills really that are in high demand that it's possible for us to help with. But more and more, what we've tried to do in order to achieve scale is identify industrial and to try to help with that.
Incredible. So there are so many benefits to the work you're doing, and I read some statistics on your website, and one that jumped out at me was, I'm quoting, families relocated through TBB see an increase of 750% in their income, and 60% of relocated candidates are able to send remittances to their extended families in difficult circumstances. Can you talk about sort of the ripple effects of the work you're doing? Because that's pretty incredible.
Sure. I mean, obviously the remittances is a big ripple effect. The fact that children move from a place where they can't go to school, don't have access to healthcare, to a place where they're going to grow up educated and healthy, and then they're going to have kids, and those kids are going to have kids. You really see it moving down through the generations. one of the issues when we first started was, are we just helping mostly men? Because most of our early candidates were men. And our answer to that was most of our men are married. It means their wives are coming over, their lives are changed. Many of those women come over and go to school and take advantage of education systems. The other, I think, big ripple effect we've had, the refugees have, our candidates have said to us that we give them hope. We make them feel like they're whole people again. That before Talent Beyond Boundaries started, they were only asked about the vulnerabilities. And now they're asked about their strength. Um, and I think that one of our big goals is to change the way refugees are perceived. And I think we're doing that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful part of the work, because I think we all sort of have a bias. I think if you meet somebody and they might not look like you, they can't speak your language very well, there's this assumption that they don't have a whole lot to offer. And then you find out they're as well educated as you are. They've got a skill that is so desirable, right? I mean, it just seems like the self-esteem that you're creating for people, it must be pretty gratifying for the two of you to see that happen.
Yeah. And I should say we've been really surprised. We had what we thought was a simple idea. Then we learned how complex it was. But we got lucky and hired some incredibly talented people who really made this happen.
And it seems like, I'm sure this has been like pushing a rock up a hill, but it seems like you're so on the side of the angels, and this is such a win-win-win. The employers win, the refugees win, the countries win. I mean, if you think about the complaints about immigration here in the United States, some of it is just, they're a drain on our tax dollars. There's, so expensive to house them, and you are creating solutions to all of these problems. So it seems to me that, again, with these great case studies of other countries like Canada and Australia, that the next wave could be in a country like the United States.
One would hope so. I mean, what I appreciate about our candidates is that they are people with incredible resilience and perseverance, who are deeply committed to their families. They're exactly the people you want in your communities.
Right. Yeah. My thing here at the Optimism Institute is that immigrants are the ultimate optimists when you think about it.
Yeah.
To do that, to displace yourself and pick up your family and move to a strange place where you can't even speak the language, and when all these barriers are in your face, you must have something that's obviously you're often leaving from a terrible situation, but this incredible hope and optimism, such a desire to get busy and get to work and support your family. You also, on your website, have a very simple and elegant list of strategic goals for the next several years through 2027. And I'm curious to know, they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know if it's sequential or not, but where the biggest obstacles are. The first goal is skilled immigration pathways are open to refugees. You've obviously made a lot of progress on that. Is there much left to do on that front, aside from a country like the United States, but the countries where you're in, do you feel like those pathways are as open as you can make them?
In some countries, they're still being run as pilots. And what our goal is to have those pilots become full-time, solutions. And we don't want to see it be a special refugee cap program, for example. I mean, it's okay if you have a program that says if you're a refugee, you have these lesser documentation requirements. We don't want that to be capped at the first 500, right?
Right. And then you say goal 2 is displaced people can access the pathways. I would think, I'm trying to picture, a refugee family. They're kind of dazed and confused. They're getting how are they? They've got to demonstrate they have these skills. They've got to get linked up with TBB. It seems to me that access, you create the pathways, but providing the access and just these linkages has got to be a big part of your challenge.
And it's funny. We've been talking about, we're calling it autonomous access.
Okay.
And right now, 75% of the people coming into Australia are doing it autonomously. And
interesting.
what happens is you've got a group of, say, Afghans in Australia. They learn that this pathway's there. They write back to their families and their friends, and they say, you should look at this. Those people then get into, reach out, find their own jobs, and then get in touch with TBB to help them figure out how to work through the pathways. Canada has a program, a skilled workers federal program, where anybody with certain education levels and English ability and skills can apply. And that's been publicized enough that refugees are starting to apply to that program on their own. In some cases, they reach out to us and we try to help with information and to smooth some bumps, but increasingly refugees are doing that on their own. One of the big barriers that needs to be solved, though, is a point we talked about earlier, which is expense. So one of the things we've been experimenting with are a couple of different ways that refugees can finance those moves.
Interesting. And we talked about, oh, by the way, in a place like Australia, I spent a summer there years ago when I was in college, their winter. And it wasn't the most welcoming place for immigrants. And there were a lot of tensions. At the time, it was a lot of Vietnamese. There were some awful slurs, directed against them. I would think one of the benefits of your program could also be a greater acceptance of immigrants because they're coming into the country and very quickly, if not immediately, being productive, not a drain on resources, all those sorts of things. It seems that the overall image of immigration and immigrants could be vastly improved by a service like yours.
We certainly hope so. And I should say our candidates who've gone to Australia have all reported very warm welcomes.
Good. Like I said, it was a long time ago. The business model of Talent Beyond Boundaries is efficiently designed, with a small staff being supported by hiring entities who help pay for the costs of placing refugees and by philanthropic contributions to this 501c3 organization. And as for my experience in Australia, nearly 40 years ago, let me first say that I loved the people there. They were incredibly welcoming and fun, and to this day, it's the only place I've ever been where people told me that they liked my accent. The fact that all these years later, so much progress has been made there in welcoming people from other countries is heartening and a great cause for optimism. Getting back to the final segment of my Blue Sky conversation with Mary Louise and Bruce Cohen, I wanted to talk about TBB's long-term goal of helping change immigration systems around the world and whether they've seen any signs of success here.
The change we're seeing is, for example, the UN Refugee Agency, which we've worked with from day one, is much more not just accepting, but involved in promoting this complementary solution to humanitarian resettlement. They're much more active. The International Organization for Migration, which is another huge UN agency, is becoming very engaged in this and sees this as part of the solution to international migration. So more and more we're seeing not just countries, but regions of the world, international organizations. And the other thing is other refugee serving organizations, much larger than Talent Beyond Boundaries. People like the International Rescue Committee and others are seeing this as an activity in which they too want to be engaged. The benefit of that we see is that that's how we'll get to scale. The more agencies and partners who are engaged in these types of activities, whether it's sourcing the talent or doing the matching with employers or helping people settle when they do relocate, whatever aspect of this journey people can and agencies can get involved in, that's what will lead to real scale.
Right. There's no way that your organization with 65 people And why reinvent something that's already, if there are partnerships out there, why not take full advantage of them? So your fifth goal is the solution is sustained through technology and partnerships. I think the partnerships you just covered in some degree in the private sector. I'm curious to know the role you see technology playing. You mentioned a database of potential employees. Tell me more about how you see technology playing a role in the future.
Well, people who know tech a lot better than we do can probably provide better answers. But I think you can use technology as the marketplace for employers and refugees to find each other. That's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing is to your question about how refugees learn how to access. You can do a lot more information. You can make it a much richer place. And our thought is as AI advances, there's going to be better and better ways to do this.
Absolutely. And by the way, to the extent that language is a barrier in some of these cases, I just saw yesterday the TED organization just released about 10 TED Talks where it's an old TED Talk and they've run it through some AI program. Not only does it translate the speaker in real time, you can pick German, Spanish, French. It actually resyncs their lips.
Wow.
When we're done with this call, check it out. It's a little creepy and it sounds like the person's voice. So it's not that sort of computer generated, French voice. It is the person's voice. Their lips are moving in French instead of English. It's bizarre. But those, I mean, you don't have to go that far with helping a refugee in a country where they don't speak the language. But there's some pickups there that could be extremely helpful.
Right.
Incredible. So you two were sort of very hands-on, very involved in the founding of this. You are stepping back, it seems, from what I see on the website. Where do you see your role going in the future? And then how big could this get? What is sort of your dream as you hand this off to others who are going to be stewards of TBB going into the future?
Well, we are very involved right now because our CEO has decided to move to a less stressful job for a while.
Ah, okay.
She's fabulous, but she lives in Australia, which means that she is working from 6 a.m. until midnight because she's running an organization across all time zones.
That's a long way away from most of the places you're serving.
Yeah, right. So she is stepping back to do a prestigious fellowship for the next year.
Oh, great.
And so we are right now starting to interview and recruiting a new CEO, which I think means we're going to be pretty involved in the near future. But what I think our dream, and this sounds terrible, is that 20 years from now, you don't need TPB because those pathways are open. The marketplace is taking care of it. And if you're a skilled if you're a refugee who has job skills in demand, whether you're a butcher or, nuclear physicist, there is a way for you to access international job opportunities, secure the financing you need, even if it's a loan that you're going to pay back, and be able to move to a country where you can contribute and raise your family peacefully.
It's an ambitious but pretty straightforward vision. It seems to me, and again, like I said, there's so many wins here for so many of the different players. So as we wrap this up, let's talk about those players. If someone's listening to this who is, for example, a potential employer, is the simplest thing, connecting with you all on a website and starting to work this out. How can people get in touch with you all? And I assume it's all there.
It should all be on the website.
Okay. And then
if there's anybody who reaches out and says, I can't find it, feel free to share our email addresses.
I will do that. And if there are any CEO candidates out there of qualified candidates, that's another opportunity. But more likely, people might be interested in supporting you in other ways. And are you a 501c3 or what is your status for taking donations?
We're a 501c3 in the U.S.
Okay.
We also have charitable status in Canada, the UK, and Australia.
By the way, Blue Sky has a very sizable Canadian following, and I can't explain it. Maybe it's my hockey references. I'm not sure, but this will actually reach quite a few people in Canada. So
That's great. Well, I should say we're really proud of our Canadian operation. We have a great board in Canada headed by a former immigration minister, John McCallum.
Oh,
and a terrific team up there.
Terrific. Well, I can't thank the two of you enough. You are joining me on the first day of your summer break. I appreciate you taking this time, and the work you are doing is incredibly inspiring. It's very ambitious, and I really appreciate you sharing the story with our Blue Sky listeners.
Well, thank you, Bill. Really appreciate being included. And this is fun.
Take care. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.
Listening to Mary Louise and Bruce talk about the skilled worker database that TBB has put together, I have to mention that the features of relatively simple technology that we take for granted, like the ability to put together a dynamic, shareable database of 100,000 skilled refugees around the world, are something that we shouldn't take for granted. And we should see these as a foundational reason for optimism as our world continues to progress. And as for their long-term dream, as optimistic social entrepreneurs, I think they have the ideal one, that at some point in the not-too-distant future, immigration pathways will be smoothed to the point where the work of their organization will no longer be necessary, and they can simply close up shop. And lastly, an update on the TBB CEO situation. The organization has hired a new one. So thanks anyway, but no need to send in your suggestions. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Mary Louise and Bruce Cohen. Before you go, please leave us a rating or review. These help us keep making our shows better, and they make it easier for new listeners to find us. While you're at it, you might want to subscribe to Blue Sky wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the Blue Sky Weekend newsletter at theoptimisminstitute.com and follow us on social media. This and all Blue Sky episodes are made possible by the incredible editing and mixing done by the team at Sound On Studios. You can learn more about their work at soundonstudios.com. All graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are provided by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K. If you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.